There are plenty of racing games built around a single manufacturer. Ford Racing, Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed, Ferrari Challenge, the Chevrolet Corvette game, I mean hell, there was even a Toyota Yaris game for some reason. But the game we're looking at today is a bit of a different breed. Welcome to the Worst Racing Games, the internet series where you guys suggest different racing games that you think are terrible, then I play them, review them, and rank them. So last week I picked up the absolutely horrendous Fast and Furious Showdown for the Xbox 360. Oh man, what a wild ride that was. Anyway, this week the Worst Racing Games wheel has sent us back to the PlayStation 2 for Alfa Romeo Racing Italiano. Now, this isn't simply a racing game about Alfa Romeos, it's also an RPG. A racing game RPG, now that does sound oddly familiar, and that's because last year, in the Worst Racing Game series, we covered Corvette Evolution GT, a racing game RPG that was actually from the same developer and released a year later, so here we go again, I guess. Alright, so let's just get a bit of backstory about the game before we actually dive into it. So it was originally released in Europe in May 2005 as S.C.A.R, Squadra Course Alfa Romeo. I've probably butchered some of that pronunciation, so I apologise if anyone is Italian here. But the game was developed by Italian studio Milestone and published by Black Bean Games. America received it a bit later in March 2006, renamed Alfa Romeo Racing Italiano, and published instead by Valken Games. And considering Milestone was the same developer behind Screamer, the connection makes a strange amount of sense. Screamer was not a conventional racing game and didn't do a lot of things that other racing games were doing at the time, and to be fair, the same can be said for the 2026 Screamer reboot as well. So the point is, this was not exactly a conventional racing game, this was a racing game where you could equip trousers that would improve your acceleration. Is that brilliant, or is it completely ridiculous? I don't really know. So first of all, let's start where any player starts when beginning a game, on the main menu, so let's head on over to Live Action Cledge. Thank you very much, VoiceOver Cledge, and welcome to the main menu of Alfa Romeo Racing Italiano. Now, the best thing I can say about this menu from the offset is that this is very much so a 2000s PS2 racing games menu. It's this whole blue theme, you've got the Alfa Romeo badge floating back and forth in the background, there's some cars driving past. It's all very racing game career focused looking. And it's got similar sound effects to go with it as well. Outside of that, you know, it's alright. I think this is a pretty good first impression for a game as far as I can see. I think it's a pretty good first impression as far as I can tell, but I will say there are a lot of menus in this game. Like, I would say probably too many menus. Menus for upgrades, menus for gears, menus for money, menus for the 800 different championship modes. That's a slight exaggeration, there's like 4, but the point is, there are a lot of menus, and I think if you've just booted the game up for the first time, it doesn't do a very good job of explaining any of what it is to the player, which isn't the best. But in terms of presentation, it's pretty good. Thanks very much, Live Action Cledge. So let's focus on the RPG side of things. So the game's manual describes its RPG structure as being centered on driver development rather than vehicle tuning, which does sound reasonable. A professional racing driver, you know, should improve through experience, reaction times, confidence, racecraft, staying calm under pressure, all seem like perfectly sensible things. Then, the game decides increased driving experience can somehow make the actual car accelerate faster for some reason, and that's where things become kind of interesting. So, when you begin the Dynasty mode, or I guess you could just call it Career if you want to not be fancy about it, you have to create a driver profile. That driver earns XP by performing well during races, not just by winning, which is good, you can overtake somebody, complete a clean lap, set a lap record, intimidate another driver, or knock somebody out, and we'll get to that a bit later. But the point is, the game rewards motorsport professionalism and also psychological warfare equally. You earn enough experience, and you level up. It's an RPG, you know how this works. Every new level gives you skill points that can be allocated across 9 different abilities. These influence various aspects of your driver and, for some reason, car, including handling, acceleration, resistance to pressure, and the effectiveness of special mechanics. Once points have been assigned, that's it. They're permanent. And I like the concept. Racing games normally represent improvement through the cars that you unlock, but in this game, the cars stay roughly the same and you become the upgrade. That is interesting. The problem is that some of the skills don't really make any sense. Improving your ability to withstand intimidation, yeah, fine. Improving anticipation, yeah, that actually makes sense. Making your Alfa Romeo accelerate faster because the bloke sitting behind the steering wheel suddenly now has the ability to do so, I'm kind of less convinced about that one, to be honest. Apparently the engine noticed my personal development and just suddenly wants to be supportive. That's the only way I can think it makes sense. And to be honest, you could just easily dump all of your skill points into handling and acceleration. So, like, you don't really need to focus on the other things because you can get a massive, massive advantage just by putting it into your car, even if the game says it's not going into your car. And of course, because this is an RPG, there's also gear that you can equip. The racing gear isn't cosmetic because you basically just can't see your driver anyway, but helmets, gloves, suits, and boots can modify your abilities. They can directly affect things like grip, braking performance, and the effectiveness of the Tiger effect, which is essentially just the modern racing game's rewind button. And to be fair, it is literally just a standard equipment system from any RPG ever. It's just very weird to see it in a racing game, which means, yeah, you can get statistically superior helmets, gloves, suits, and boots. Imagine this in an actual race. You explain this to your racing engineer. What's different for your qualifying session today? New suspension? Nah, I've changed my gloves and suddenly I'm 4/10 faster. Perfect. It does sound ridiculous, but in a way it actually kind of works, and I think it is pretty cool because it's not something you see very often in this genre of video games. Special gear events throughout the career mode allow you to earn new equipment, meaning progression isn't simply about unlocking cars and circuits. You're gradually assembling a better equipped driver as well. You finish an event, earn XP, gain a level, improve a skill, unlock equipment, equip a slightly better helmet, then immediately start wondering whether that helmet will somehow allow an Alfa 147 to corner faster. It's the kind of meaningless number progression my brain is embarrassingly vulnerable to, and I kind of love it. But the RPG ideas somehow don't stop there. Your driver has a condition meter. Get another car close behind you and your driver begins experiencing pressure. The heartbeat becomes louder, your condition meter starts falling. Let the pressure continue for long enough and eventually your driver reaches panic status. The screen blurs, the audio gets funny, and your vision is suddenly very, very impaired and driving becomes significantly more difficult. Basically, your driver is experiencing an anxiety attack because someone's drafting them. Which initially sounds ridiculous, and to be honest, the impaired vision thing is incredibly irritating when you're in the race. But there is a genuinely alright idea underneath it. You know, real racing drivers do make mistakes under pressure, but I'm sure their vision probably doesn't go like that. You know, they attempted to turn that psychological pressure into an actual game mechanic, and it does work sometimes, because that exact same system applies to opponents. Stay close behind another driver and you'll begin intimidating them. Their condition bar falls, keep the pressure on, and eventually they enter a knockout state. Lose control and make a mistake, except half the time, and this is the part that's frustrating, they don't really make a mistake, they kind of wobble on a straight a little bit and then just continue on the trajectory they were already on. So it doesn't really work the same way against the AI opponents as it does on you. And to be honest, I seem to recall having that exact same issue with Corvette Evolution GT as well, so I'm not surprised by that whatsoever. Alright, so let's just quickly go over the Tiger effect as well, because this was like one of the game's selling features, and in hindsight, now it seems kind of boring, but I guess at the time, it would have been pretty cool. So the Tiger effect is essentially the modern day reverse that you get in games like Forza and Forza Horizon. You crash, you hold the button down, time reverses, you made a terrible corner, reverse it, stupid AI takes you out, reverse it, you know. The amount of time you can rewind and how frequently you can use the ability, though, depends on your driver skills and equipment, and after use, it needs time to recharge. So that's the difference. I mean, it's a functioning rewind system in 2005, 3 years before Grid introduced its flashback mechanic, or even 4 years before Forza Motorsport 3 introduced the rewind to that series. Now, I'm not going to claim that this game single-handedly invented rewinding in racing games, but seeing a recognizable modern racing feature here is pretty fascinating, especially because of its absolutely ridiculous name, the Tiger effect. I mean, why Tiger? I don't know, maybe undo my terrible driving effect wasn't really working well with the marketing team. Alright, so with all that yapping out the way, let's actually talk about the handling. Because unfortunately all of these clever systems and intuitive things are sitting on top of driving that isn't nearly as interesting. The handling lives somewhere between arcade racer and simulation. Road cars feel relatively heavy, the more racy machinery feels a bit more planted. Braking matters, but the game also allows some enormous slides and corner speeds that don't feel particularly realistic. But I will also mention that the brakes on most of these cars feel like absolute ass. I don't know, they just feel like they have no power to them whatsoever, like you slam the brakes on and it takes about 7 working days for the car to slow down enough. But aside from that, I guess the handling isn't completely terrible, it's just very uninspiring. There's some weight, there are some differences between cars, and yeah, you do need to respect braking zones with a significant amount, but nothing feels particularly detailed. The steering can feel very loose and grip disappears in some very strange ways, even just on straights. And once you've increased your driver statistics, the handling starts becoming even more detached from what the car itself should logically be capable of. And that creates an odd problem. The RPG system is constantly telling me I'm developing a better driver, but sometimes it's like you're unlocking better physics. Now, with that said, this game does also include damage, and damage is much more meaningful here than it is in a lot of other racing games that released around the same time. You know, unless of course we're talking like Burnout or something, but anyway, every vehicle has a condition meter. Collisions reduce it, leave the circuit aggressively like on the grass and you'll lose even more, and if you completely empty that health bar, you are eliminated from the race, and the opponents are governed by that same system, and I have actually seen some of them just break down and give up. And there is some alright visual damage as well. Windows crack, lights break, and bodywork can become dented. I mean, it's relatively restrained compared with some other racing games like Toka, but it's alright. The fact that they've done it is impressive as it is, because a lot of racing games of this kind of genre, ignoring the RPG elements, tend to have basically no visual representation of damage whatsoever, or if they do, it's just some mild scrapes. So that is nice, but what it also does is prevents you from simply using opponents as barriers, because obviously you don't want your race to be over, and that's also important because the AI will happily use you as one. So although the handling is fairly loose and arcade-like and also just not very good, the game rewards reasonably controlled driving, so you can't just Forza Horizon your way around every hairpin by using another vehicle as your steering wheel. Now, in terms of car selection, the game advertises 25 Alfa Romeos, and technically, there are, but many are variations of the same base models, standard versions, competition versions, and higher spec variants, rather than 25 completely unique vehicles. Still, if you like Alfa Romeo, there is interesting machinery here. Modern road cars are joined by competition cars and historical models, giving the game at least some sense of Alfa's wider motorsport identity. And that's pretty cool, and it's also good because it isn't just Alfa 147, another 147, another 147, but in a different colour. There are enough differences in age and purpose to make progression interesting. The problem is that I think the game doesn't really do enough with the license for Alfa Romeo. You know, this is a game dedicated to one manufacturer. You'd think there'd be some archive footage, technical info, or detailed stories about the cars, but there just isn't. There's nothing. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity. If you're building an entire game around one manufacturer, celebrate the manufacturer. Tell us about why these cars matter. Give us old photographs and racing victories and explain the engineering, show prototypes, whatever. Just do something to celebrate the brand. I mean, Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed understood this. This one mostly just gives me cars. They're Alfa Romeos, yeah, but that's it. Job done. The track selection is another mixed bag in my opinion. There are over 20 course configurations built from 11 main locations, with most tracks offering short and full versions. The selection combines real circuits with fictional or road-based routes, especially inspired by Italy. But you have real-world venues including Hockenheim and Riccardo Tormo outside of Valencia, alongside routes inspired by places such as Milan, Florence, and just the Italian countryside, and some of the layouts are genuinely really good. The Italian road circuits suit the game particularly well. Narrow sections, elevation changes, long sweeping corners, actual scenery. And then you arrive at some of the dedicated racing circuits and they don't really look as good. The countryside courses looked detailed, but the actual tracks are kind of sparse or repetitive, I guess. But I will say I do enjoy the variety of the tracks. I mean, a small racing game like this benefits enormously from having circuits that don't all look the same. And the switch between permanent circuits, city roads, and countryside routes at least prevents the Dynasty mode becoming visually boring, like, immediately. It waits several hours before doing that. So in terms of game modes, Dynasty is your main event. It is the career mode. It is divided into a few different things. You've got tours, challenges, and time assault. There are 5 progressively harder tours: rookie, semi-pro, pro, expert, and unlimited. And within them, there are also a bunch of different events. There's XP events where you get experience, gear events where you unlock the gear, tournaments, which is, self-explanatory, and then you have championships, which is basically the same thing, just with a larger lap count. The XP events are alright, but you get XP from all the other events as well by just racing, so to me they are kind of pointless, but I get the idea behind them is to level your driver up before you tackle the rest of the tour. So yeah, the structure is very straightforward. Race, earn XP, level up, unlock something, repeat. And that's pretty much it for the tours. There's also a challenge mode as well, and those challenges can range from completing events without taking any damage, maintaining a certain speed through certain sections, or overtaking an opponent before the time expires. It's a nice change from the normal races. They test precision or speed, but the wider issue is there just isn't enough going on. The problem is quantity. There's not enough content here to compete with the enormous racing games surrounding it. Gran Turismo 4 has enough events to form a second career in this game. You could probably finish this game in like a weekend if you're super determined. I can't see it taking any longer than that. But, again, there is something appealing about the smaller scale. It does have its advantages. Now let's talk about the AI, because the AI definitely has personality, but unfortunately, said personality is violence. Opponents are aggressive, they'll make contact with you, they'll make contact with each other, and they'll make contact with the wall. They'll defend and attack one another, and because the intimidation system applies to everybody, races can occasionally descend into complete chaos. I mean, the first corner always seems like an open lobby in a racing sim. It's just utter chaos. One driver gets pressured, their condition collapses, they make a mistake, and two other cars hit them, and suddenly there's an Alfa Romeo convention occurring sideways across the track. To be fair, I really like the unpredictability of it. The intimidation mechanics in these situations create unusually lively races where leaders could genuinely crack under pressure. And it does make the NPC opponents feel a bit more real because they will make mistakes, they will crash, they'll act just like I do in any other racing game, and that's pretty badly. So in that sense, the AI is entertaining, but it is also sometimes awful. But I'll take the unpredictable AI over cars travelling around the circuit in a perfectly spaced racing line queue. At least something is happening. Usually something irritating, don't get me wrong, but at least something. Now, in terms of its visuals, to be honest, this game was kind of mediocre even when it launched. The cars are easily the strongest part, don't get me wrong, models are recognisable, reflections attempt to give the bodywork some life, and the damage work is actually pretty cool in my opinion. But there's a lot of jagged edges, some very glossy materials, and occasional strange reflection behaviour that kind of stop them from being particularly convincing. But for the most part, the cars are very solid looking. The environments fare a bit worse, as I mentioned earlier. Some tracks have some decent scenery, others are kind of empty, but the textures themselves are kind of blurry, there's a lot of building repetition, and crowds occasionally seem more theoretical than physical. You can hear people on certain stretches of track, but you don't really see the evidence that anyone's actually attended. However, from reading reviews at the time, it seems at least that the PS2 version of this game on the actual console, rather than emulating it like I am, maintained a decent frame rate even with 8 cars and frequent racing incidents, so at least the performance itself was pretty strong. And I'd rather have a stable, ugly racing game than a beautiful slideshow, but ideally, neither of those things. Now, in terms of sound design, again, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The engine sounds are functional in my opinion, but when you get the blurry vision from being intimidated, the muffled audio is pretty good. And I do think that the crash effects are pretty impressive as well. It kind of reminds me of Need for Speed Shift in the sense that it really dramatizes a crash and makes it feel very real. But yeah, I don't know, the actual car audio is just kind of standard. Some of the engines I think should sound fantastic considering it's Alfa Romeo, but I think a lot of them just lack the personality that these cars actually do have. But overall, it's alright. Now, in terms of critical response, Alfa Romeo Racing Italiano doesn't actually hold a Metacritic score, but it does have 2 reviews, and both of which are negative. IGN gave it a 40 out of 100 and GameSpot gave it a 45, both of which do seem a little bit harsh if I'm being real about it. Anyway, the user score on Metacritic for this game is much better with a 7.4 average out of 10. Now, looking at sales figures for the game, it doesn't look like it sold too well. Across America and Europe, it was estimated to have sold approximately 20,000 copies. Yikes. So anyway, now the time has come to rank this game on our worst racing games tier list. Now, to be fair, there are parts of this game that are pretty damn cool. The RPG elements, as I said with Corvette Evolution, are very cool. It's something you don't really see in racing games very often, and I like the fact that this was the early days of the flashback feature and how it's integrated into the RPG system. The gear system is also pretty cool, although it's still kind of funny to me that equipping like better trousers or a suit can give you better acceleration, but that's by the by. But it is dragged down by some fairly shoddy visuals and some very shoddy handling. So for me, this game will actually be joining Corvette Evolution GT amongst other single manufacturer games in the meh category. Damn, these categories are starting to get filled up now. And so that brings us to the end of our look at Alfa Romeo Racing Italiano. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think of this game? Have you played it? Are you going to go check it out? And would you rank it any differently? And as always, if you have a suggestion for a game you want to see in the wheel, pop it down below as well. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe and tap that bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thank you and goodbye.